Okay. Through this hypothesis, we have to take into account, pay attention to this quote. The learner performs. Hmm? The learner does not acquire. Okay? If we look at the learner as a performer, the main character or the protagonist through this story is the learner. Okay? Hmm? The learner is the person who performs, who practices, who tries to learn or create language. Mm? Because if we look at this process as an acquisition process, the learner tends to be a passive um, element in this process. But if we say that the learner is a performer, if the learner performs language, we might say that the learner is trying to use or trying to learn to practice language. Mm? Through the monitor hypothesis, the acquisition learning distinction posits two possible ways. So, there are two manners of viewing acquisition. As the beginning, the first steps in language use, and on the other hand, learning is synonym of monitor editor to make changes in the form of language use. Okay, so through this hypothesis, there are two assumptions or two viewpoints over acquisition on the one hand and learning on the other hand. We might say that the acquisition is the beginning, just the first step in language use. Okay, the first part of this transitional form of this process. And learning refers to the act or the process of monitoring or editing these changes or producing changes in this language use in this first step in the acquisition process. Okay, so acquisition is synonym of language use, the first step or the first usages of language. And learning works as the performer. Learning works as the stage where we might monitor or edit or produce or make changes in this language use. Okay? It's like a sum where on the first step you use language, that is acquisition, and on the second stage we as teachers monitor or edit this language use, in this case acquisition. Mm? This second stage has been entitled as learning. Through this viewpoint, learning is synonym of editing, making changes in a way to improve, to better um, the language used for the first instance. Okay? Another synonym of learning is that it can alter the output before or after language use. Okay? The output we have learned is synonym of result. The result or the ability to communicate, the use of language, the language in use, that is output. Okay, the final result of this language process when trying to learn it. And through learning inside this hypothesis, we can alter the results before announcing them, before yes, before or after. What about that? For example, students announces or expresses an ideas. For example, I loves ice cream. For example, and that is the acquisition process. That is language in use. And then you, as teacher, as monitor, as editor, as the person who has the ability and the authority to make changes in this language use, in this case, this utterance, you might correct him by saying, no, the right manner to announce this utterance is to say I love without the S sound because the subject is the first person pronoun, for example. Mm? That is learning, and that is the 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 monitor usage. That is the intervention that you might introduce through the language use. In this case, through the acquisition process. Mm? You can alter the output, the result of this process before or after. For example, in the practice time, when the student is trying to announce an idea, you might check what the student is doing, and then you try to correct them. Yes, before the students will announce it. Okay, that is the way. That is a viewpoint for learning. In this case, when you um, check, when you edit or you monitor your students' process. Okay. Okay. In this case, the learner is the person who performs, is an active element in this process. And in the case of the teacher, is the person who will edit, make changes in a way to improve, obviously, this learning process. Okay. And another important element inside the monitor hypothesis is the existence of formal rules or conscious learning. Hmm? Through this way, through this hypothesis, it is important to take into account the existence of formal rules or this conscious learning. That's why we might correct our students, because there is a conscious process. Okay, so conscious learning will be used when there may exist three conditions. Okay, remember that children tend to acquire instead of learn. If they are learning, that is because we are checking, monitoring, or editing their language use. That is a conscious process. In this case, are we may be able, or we have the ability or the authority to correct them because we are in a conscious stage. Okay, that is the ideal moment to correct our students. But there are three requirements, three conditions to correct our students. Okay. In this case, the first one is time. Time to use consciously the rule. If you are trying to monitor or edit what your students are trying to announce or to create, to communicate, okay, you have to give them, or they need the necessary time to introduce, use, and incorporate in a correct way the rule you are trying to teach. Okay, so the first requirement is the necessary time, time enough to practice, or time enough to fill in the task or whatever you have prepared. The second requirement is focus on form. Focus on form. Not only you have to be conscious of the error you try to correct among your students, but also they need to understand what you are correcting among their activities, among their writing sentences or another kind of, of text. Okay, that is the second requirement. If you are going to correct your students, you have to give them the necessary information or the reasons enough for this correction, and you have to accompany your students until you may notice your student had understood what you had corrected. Okay, that's another way of learning. That's another factor, or another yes, another way to achieve what we are trying to um, create among our students, that is a correct language use. Okay, how could we do that? By giving them the time enough, the necessary time, and by giving them the reasons when correcting their mistakes. Okay, and the third requirement is knowing the rule. Knowing the rule. Remember that the word know may be translated as conocer o saber. You have the knowledge enough, have the to be like an specialist, a well-known person on a subject. Known is synonym of keep in contact with. That is the best synonym for the verb know. In this case, know the rule, keep in contact with the rule. Or, in other words, get exposed to the rule. If you are trying to teach a rule and the goal is that your students may appropriate, may acquire, may learn these rules, the best way to achieve this is to get them exposed to the rule. Give them the more opportunities you may create um, to keep them in contact with the rule through a variety of activities, through a variety of contexts, through a variety of ways. Okay, the much you might expose them to the rule, the best they are going to acquire. Okay. If we look at this third condition when get them exposed with a rule, that is opposite to a term entitled as monitor free. Monitor free. Opposite to this condition is monitor free. On the other hand, monitor free has as the main goal communication. You don't need them to acquire rules in a correct way. The goal in this case for monitor free is to establish communication, okay, as an extra information. Okay, did you understand until now?